Today I helped a Chinese student of mine look over a paper he had to write for his required social justice class at the University of California. Essentially, the object was to demonstrate his understanding of white privilege, patriarchy, and intersectionality. Unfortunately, his impression of the class was mostly surprised that mandatory political propaganda classes in both China and the US turned out to be so similar. Now, for the record, I think a required social justice class is a perfectly reasonable thing to make an 18-year-old kid do, because it's important to understand how social hierarchy is reinforced in culture. Discrimination is real and harmful to individuals and society, and learning to identify it should be a thing that educated people learn to do. Now, for the record, I think a required social justice class is a perfectly reasonable thing to make an 18-year-old kid do, because it's important to understand how social hierarchy is reinforced in culture. Discrimination is real and harmful to individuals and society, and learning to identify it should be a thing that educated people learn to do. Nevertheless, I still thought it was interesting that the prompt for this paper didn't require students to evaluate the frameworks in question or to try and think about how they might conflict with other competing frameworks, but instead the object was to narrate your personal journey of understanding how true and important the frameworks were. Again, I think these theoretical frameworks are mostly useful, but I have to wonder if forcing students to write essays about how true they are might not inspire unnecessary cynicism. Typically, ideas that you're forced to agree with are not very true. Beyond that, it's interesting to recall how American universities privilege two particular frameworks of power relations above all others, namely race and gender. After living in the Marxist paradise of China for the past 10 years and currently living in Europe, it's hard not to notice the absence of class and to get a sense of how deeply taboo it is to discuss class relations in the US. Students are encouraged to think about how discrimination might apply to women, but not necessarily how it might apply to the poor or uneducated through their failure to send the right social cues. Social cues such as, for example, being well versed in the most up-to-date thinking on social justice. The other topic absent from the discussion of social injustice is violence. So you have this absurd situation where students have become expert at identifying microaggressions, but are only vaguely aware of critical commentary on the military or police. Even while the frameworks of patriarchy and racial discrimination are useful, and even when the professors are earnest, when these two less sensitive frameworks are taught to the exclusion of others, the overall curriculum can become disingenuous. In China, when we're trying to understand the causes of its 20th century poverty, we can go as far as we like in truthfully discussing foreign imperialism and the corruption of the previous regime. But without being able to touch on other factors, even the most factually rooted refutation of imperialism and capitalist corruption tends towards propaganda. Likewise, if American students can sense that they're not allowed to concern themselves with classism and militarism, then they can't really exclusively invest themselves in the permitted frameworks of racism and sexism without playing into someone else's agenda. If you're only allowed to see half the picture, then you're not altogether unjustified in suspecting that the other half is a distraction. Thanks for watching, check back for more soon.